Well, hello. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Progressively Yours Health and Wellness Podcast. I'm Imani.
I'm Bernard.
And together we're Sankofa Institute for Wellness, and this is Progressively Yours Health and Wellness Podcast. And we have a great show planned for you this evening, as we always do. Hope everyone is having a good week, a great week, actually. And yeah, I have a couple of announcements and we have a good show. But before we get to any of that stuff, we'll do our spiritual opening.
Thank you.
All right.
As is our ritual and tradition for our show, I'd like to invite you, if you would like to participate, to take a moment, if you're seated and relaxed already, or if you're moving about, to take a moment to stand or be seated where you are. Close your eyes and take in 3 deep breaths in and out through your nose. On the exhalations, let your shoulders begin to drop. Experience the relaxation in your muscles and be open to your spiritual guides, your guardian angel that's unique to you. And ask that you receive what is intended for you tonight. As we honor and welcome the spirit of the ancestors who bless us to begin our show tonight, these words from an ancestor: Thich Nhat Hanh, the art of communicating. To begin our Thich Nhat Hanh, love is born from understanding. I define happiness as the capacity to understand and to love. Because without understanding, love, no happiness could be possible. We don't have enough understanding and love, which is why we suffer so much. That is what we are thirsting for. Compassion and love are born from understanding. How can you love unless you understand? How can the Father love his Son if he doesn't understand the suffering and difficulties of his Son? How can someone make his beloved happy without knowing anything about that person's suffering and understanding? Love is born from understanding. We do feel the urge, the need, the longing to feel understood. And understanding is the key to feeling and experiencing love. So it is indeed for the ancestors who summons us as light workers to offer love and understanding so that we can understand each other's suffering. Ashe.
Ashe.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Amen.
Amen. You know, I often think that we never know what a person is going through. I remember I had a friend when I worked at CDC, an older gentleman We would always stop and talk. And one day, you know, I saw him and he said, "Hi, Imani, how are you?" And I said, "I'm fine, thank you." And he said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "What do you mean, what's wrong?" I'm smiling. He says, "No, I can tell. Something about your energy is different today." You know, and it makes you think that, you know, any person you stop on the street, if you would have asked them, what's really going, you know, other than saying, "Hi, I'm fine," what's really going on with you in your life? And they'll probably have a whole list of things they want to unload, you know, and that's where, you know, listening and really loving other people, just the general agape kind of love, just really makes a difference in this world. So many people just need you to see them and sometimes to hear their story and what's going on in their life at that particular moment. We're back.
All right.
Hopefully you can hear us. I don't know what happened. Technology, living in the city, sort of city. Anyway, just a couple of announcements to share. Again, I asked you to please subscribe and check off the little bell on YouTube. That way you'll get announcements every week about our shows and what the topic is. Also, if you would like to be listed as a member of our trusted network, this is really big. Our website now has a new feature called the Trusted Network. And, you know, it's going to be seen by hundreds and thousands of people. So if you'd like to be seen as part of our trusted network, which means you'll get your own digital card and you'll be there when people pull up our site, they can see you as another business or opportunity for them to check out. And the network is global. It's in the US, Canada, and around the world. So it's a really nice thing. Another big announcement, well, before I get to the big announcement, we have a dear friend of ours, Brother Tobiah Israel, who does a wonderful workshop called Brain Balancing, is doing his workshop this weekend, February 24th, from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and on the 25th from 2 to 4. And there's a registration. Reach out to Brother Israel. His number is 313-608-1403. This is one of the best courses I've ever taken, with practical information that can help you to help yourself and to help other people who are needing to be balanced. And when we're off balance, a lot of things can happen in terms of our health and wellness. So you definitely want to reach out to him. We're going to have him on the show, and he'll probably do another class in a couple of weeks, but he is doing one this weekend. So I wanted to mention that. And our big announcement is that the Sankofa Institute for Wellness is actually opening for services starting, well, our grand opening with the Precision Health and Wellness Center in Suwanee, Georgia. The grand opening is on March 1st and March 2nd. And there will be all types of services, wellness services offered. at this location, we will have red light therapy and foot detox and a number of other things and supplements as well. So we're very, very excited about the opening. We've been trying to get our perfect place, and this is a phenomenal facility that we're going to be in and growing with them and learning with them. So the flyer, it might be kind of hard to read for those who are watching the podcast, but anyway, it's March 1st and 2nd. Our partner, who is the head of the Precision Health and Wellness Center, Ms. Samantha Chewy, is going to be on our show next week. So she'll be talking about all of the services that they offer in addition to the ones that we are going to be offering. So we are very, very, very excited about that. And we hope that those of you in the Atlanta area, and even, if you're 2 hours out, it'd be worth the trip to come into Atlanta to visit our wellness center. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce Dr. Eugene Robinson.
Yeah, thank you. It is an honor and, privilege and just personal pleasure for me to introduce our guest tonight, who is a very dear friend of Money and myself. And I've known Dr. Eugene Robinson since 1991. I saw him earlier when I was in seminary. He came and did a seminar class for a group of seminarians in my particular denomination. And what drew me to him, I was a young father, and he talked about his relationship with his sons, and he used the word meta communication. And that word attracted me, and I was curious, what did he mean by that? And so he talked about, sometimes he would have a conversation with his sons and he would take the opposite position just to help strengthen them. And I was just a young dad and trying to struggle to be a father. And I kept Gene in my mind, in my radar. That was 1986 at the ITC here in Atlanta. When I returned from Desert Shield, Desert Storm, I knew that I wanted to do doctoral work in pastoral care and counseling. One of the prerequisites was to do what we call clinical pastoral education. And Gene at that time was the director of chaplaincy services at Grady Memorial Hospital. And I contacted him, told him what I needed to do a year residency. He took me on, and our friendship began to develop from that point forward. So who is he? That's the personal relationship and friend that I've known for years. On the professional front, Dr. Robinson's career spans over 40 years as a licensed marriage and family therapist here in Georgia. With a rich background in theology, mental health therapy, marriage, and family counseling, he's an esteemed member of the American Psychotherapy Association, the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapists, and the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education. His experience includes significant roles in both educational and clinical settings, contributing to his reputation as a leader in the field of pastoral counseling. Currently, Dr. Eugene Robinson serves as the Director of Spiritual Health at Emory University Hospital, Wesley Woods campus, overseeing spiritual care across various facilities. His role extends to Associate Director of Spiritual Health and Certified APCE Educator at Emory Healthcare, where he administers the CPE program and the Peachford Fellow Program in Behavioral Health. Gene's scholarly contributions include several articles on pastoral psychotherapy and supervision, with ongoing work focusing on the role of fathering in the lives of young Black males. It is indeed an honor and privilege for us to welcome to our show tonight as we continue the series of relationship development in the month of February. Tonight we look at talking about what it is to care for our elderly parents, and our need of taking care of ourselves as those of us in that realm have to care for our aging loved ones. Welcome to the show, Dr. Eugene Robinson.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hello, Gene. How are you?
I am well. I am well and glad to be here with the two of you.
Thank you so much. We're happy to have you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we do feel blessed and honored that as you bring yourself, your wisdom, your experience over the journey of pastoral ministry and supervision, psychotherapy. And as we were planning this, you were the first person that I thought of to have this conversation tonight. I've had some of my clients who have expressed interest in having and learning more about what it is to care for elderly parents. So we can kind of expand that, but that's kind of the gist. And I know being at Wesley Woods, you've seen and related to a lot in this area. My time down at Crestview, when you took me on as one of the chaplains on staff at Grady for the 4.5 years that I was there, enriched my experience in the area. So let's talk about that. But before we get into that, share briefly, Gene, with the listening audience about who you are when you think about the life of Eugene Robinson between the ages of when you were born. Though you don't have conscious memory, you've heard the stories. I know you're the eldest of, I think, 10. Between the ages of birth and 12, just tell us one or two stories of what comes to mind about who you are.
Well, I would just initially share with you my early beginnings. I was born with an underage mother. I often teased my dad as I got older that he uh, and my mother gotten together in the day's world. My dad was been charged with statutory rape
Mm,
because my mother was 15
mm,
um, at the time. And one of the significant stories in my life actually is around an older person. I became the child of my grandmother, even though my mother was around, but I was really the child of my grandmother. My grandmother decided my mother was going to finish school and go to college, but that meant I only saw my mother at break times. So my attachment, and as you know this from attachment theory, I got attached to my grandmother as the alpha female in my life, and that never changed until she died. That
mm,
was not true with my dad. I knew my dad was always my dad, kind of notion, and so that heavily influenced my development. I think the part of me that sometimes is overly serious is because I was raised by an older person,
mm,
um, and that has its limits, but it also has some advantages. Um, to that kind of thing. So that would be one story I would tell that is extremely important to me and to know a little bit about who I am. The other part of it is my grandmother had a friend who owned a store in our neighborhood. This was before 7-Elevens and all of that stuff was all over the place. In the black community, there was often one family that owned a local store that was sell small things, like bread and cokes and stuff like that. Well, every morning, and this was my early memory, 5 and 6 years old, my grandmother would get me up and I had to walk with her to her friend's store. And I would sit between her legs while these two older ladies would talk. But I couldn't talk. They would drink coffee and they would give me a little 6-ounce Coke.
mm.
And so I would sit there and I would listen to these two older ladies talk. And believe it or not, I attribute a great extent as to why I end up being in the ministry and being a therapist, where I listen a whole lot. So, so that's one of my favorite stories. Just to share one more, my dad was my champion.
Mm,
Um, I remember once in high school, we lost our home by fire, and my dad was out of town. And when he came to town, I wanted to be at the house when he got there, and I was. And he stood in front of the house, and for the first time, I saw my dad cry. I saw tears run down his cheeks. Then he turned and he looked at me, and he said, "We will build it back." On one part of that story, it sounds like a sad story, and in a way, it is. But that was an upper end to the story for me. I saw a strength in my father that I had never seen before on that occasion. And even though he was in tears, there was strength. And that became my model, or part of my model of what it means to be a man and to have a family. And so those are the two stories I would share as a way of getting to know me. To know me, you would have to know those stories.
Thank you.
Beautiful story.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Eugene, segue that in. You talked about some of the elders that you were around. So you're called to ministry. You got various, honest, I should say. Elderly care and the way we relate to our elders has changed tremendously over the course of time.
Yeah.
What Tell us, both from your clinical and your educational and personal experiences, why elderly care still remains important, and what have you noticed over the change? What have we lost in the gain of high technology and places to where we can place our elderly in this day and age?
Well, given my age, I grew up in a period where you kept your elderly home, and it was the family's responsibility to take care of the elderly. I certainly experienced that with my grandmother. I was with her when she died with my mother, and she died at home. This was back when doctors used to come to the house. She died in the late 50s. Since then, I have experienced my mother and father dying, and I was a part of their care. And so, one of the major shifts that I have observed over the years is that families do not necessarily not keep the elderly at home and see that as a part of the village, if I may use that term. But now the movement is towards some nursing home or some assisted living. That seems to be the direction people have tended to move to, kind of thing. So that's a big, big shift. But with that shift, there's also a lot of grief involved when people make that kind of transition. And just to give you a quick story of grief, when at Wesley Woods, in two of the buildings on the campus, they treat only the senior adults. Most of them are 70 and older. The oldest one is 102 at this point. And what we often see and what I experience is that often there's a lot of grief with the senior because they have been taken away from what's familiar to them. An example would be they are accustomed to living in their homes, but their children living elsewhere, and therefore they are placed in a nursing home for the daily care. But giving up what's familiar is a big loss for people nowadays. Some of that is the hospice is attempting to manage some of that by helping some people stay in the home, but largely that's a small piece of that world experience. On the personal side, when Mary and I built our home 30 years ago, we recognized that our parents were aging. One of the things we wanted was a basement that was completely separate from the other part of the house. In other words, it could be an apartment all of its own. Because we both grew up in situations where we took care of the elderly, that was a part of our structuring our home. It was to have a place that if we had to take our parents in and other relatives, we could do that. So over the years, we have taken in three relatives, parents, two of my parents, and one of Mary's brothers. They were with us until they died.
Mm.
And we were honoring our history. That was our history.
Mm,
It was playing itself, out. And one of the real problems I see in the current structure is that if the family has some success at all, often a mother or father would be placed in a nursery and the children will live somewhere else because of job opportunities or whatever.
mm,
So that elderly person may be left in a city by themselves. At Emory, one of the things we see in families where they may not have a lot of success financially is that Emory end up being the guardian of the elderly.
Mm.
And what happens, they request guardianship from the state, is granted, and then Emory gets some money from the state on the Medicaid to help offset the cost for that. So you see more and more of that. The average um, person on our campus who get that type of age is generally in their 80s, and the family may be available, but the family takes no responsibility for them financially because they may not have a lot of resources themselves.
mhm.
And so they would not sign any papers. That person then becomes under Emory's charge, and therefore Emory make all of the major decisions about the life of that person. I hope
Mm.
that responded
Correct.
to what
Yeah.
you in some of the challenges that is in caring for the elderly nowadays.
Mhm.
Mm.
I know one thing that people mention, because I was fortunate to be able to make the decision to take care of my parents as elders. But we also my grandfather lived with us when I was younger. It was like having a third parent in the house, and it just
Hmm.
seemed so natural. And
Hmm.
it didn't even seem like we were caring for him because he had a beautiful garden in the backyard, organic garden, and
Yeah.
he was part of the family. So I was blessed to be able to go up to Virginia and help out with my parents, and then bring my mom back here to Georgia when my dad passed. But I remember looking at a facility. It certainly wasn't the one that you're affiliated with, but it's one of the better ones in this part of town. And I walked through there and I saw a number of people who looked like my mom's age,
Hmm.
who were just sitting around. The
Yeah.
TV was on or whatever, but they were by themselves. And I can see the loneliness from that side when people can't
Yes.
do that. But I think so many people in this society, I mean, we're so busy. We have to pay the bills, and it's like we just haven't factored in how do we take care of the elderly at home, given our busy and expensive lives, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's a major issue. Um,
This is slightly different, but I would like to say a little bit about what I see happening in families uh, when they have an elderly person. It's interesting that what happens is that in many black families, in particular, a person is not legally designated to be the decision maker. It
Mm.
gets to be left to the group, and
The group.
often, yes. It so if you got says the person has five siblings,
Okay.
the five siblings then have to somehow or another figure out a way to come together and make a decision, and more often not around life and death issues. That's a difficult moment um, for the family when there is no one designated person. And each one of them could have their own agenda about what is needed. So let me give you a quick example of what I'm getting at. I am working now with a woman who is 93. She spent the bulk of her years in Atlanta after her husband died. Her youngest daughter lives in the Atlanta area, and so she has designated the youngest daughter to be the decision making for her medically and financially. The oldest child lives in California, and feels like she should be in charge because she is the oldest. But the mother has decided the younger daughter would be because the daughter lives near her in the city and in the state. So there's this big conflict between the two. The only saving grace in that situation is that the youngest daughter has all of the authority. She has the signed papers that says she will make this decision and this decision, kind of notion. But what I see between the two is a lot of tension
Mm-hmm.
that has really nothing to do with, quote, the senior adult. It has to do with tension between the persons who feels like they should be in charge versus the one who isn't in charge. And I see a lot of that in the caretaking, and it stresses out the patient, so to speak, to use that kind of language. It stresses them out because they see the conflict, but they're in no position to help with it.
Yeah, that's a good point. This is a conversation. I don't think there's too much happening in the public sphere because our society still values youth. And I'm glad we're having this conversation. I have a client who falls and fits exactly what you're describing. He is the eldest and of 6, and his mother left him in charge. And almost every session, he is struggling with the siblings. I have 3 of them have a different father, and so the decision-making part has been designated to him via the trust that they have and the will that the mother left behind, and they can't get on the same page. And so I'm wondering also, do you think that is also a subtle expression of unresolved grief that perhaps each child had in relationship, not with just the loss of the elderly parent, but that has a history within the family system?
Yes. Yes. I would agree with you on both fronts. I think it reflects a pattern that is already established in the family that just simply gets elevated with the stress of the moment. The other thing I would pinpoint is that one of the things I try to help my residents understand, when you have a family member who is expressing a lot of discontent, you can read that as just as a disagreeable person. Or what I try to help people to see, you may be seeing a person act out anticipatory grief rather than acknowledging what the sense of loss. They are acting it out with other people and therefore then find themselves in tension with everybody else when in reality it's grief.
Mm, mm. Yeah, thank you. And no one really is around to help process that grief, whether it's anticipatory. I received a text today, for example, of another client who says that they just had to place the father in hospice. And I can tell the way he wrote the text, and knowing this person from sessions that they're very close to the father. Now they're having to go down and be with the father. But this anticipatory grief was leading up, but to their credit, they were in a place where they could process the emotional energies that was forthcoming and preparing for this day which has arrived.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
A lot of emotions involved in it. And one of the things Dr. Michael shared last week is that, and I think you kind of alluded to this, Bernard, is that each child has their own lens in terms of their life and their parents and their relationship with their parents. Each child enters at a point of development for the parents. Mm-hmm. So they get a different piece of their parents. Yes. So even though you may be siblings living in the same house, the way that child number 1 relates to the parents is real different from the way child number 3 or 4 relates to the parent. And so there's so many factors that can create a clash or misunderstanding, among the siblings. I know, in fact, that's my sister who made a comment when we were talking about siblings earlier. She said, so true, siblings sometimes make assumptions that can impact relationships going forward.
Yes.
And
yes.
And it's, because we went through that as a family.
When I have people do their genograms, I intentionally invite them to put in miscarriages or deaths at birth, because it's so easy for them to leave that out. But I agree with you, Amani. What is going on in the parenting structure at the time the person is born and grew up impacts how they are going to respond. I agree wholeheartedly with you.
Absolutely.
With that. Yes.
One of the, Gene, one of the thoughts that I've had about this transition changes is, among us as a society, culture, in terms of how we care for elderly parents, is that there's a tremendous loss in terms of, since we don't care as we once upon a time did. I grew up in South Georgia, small town, so we, you kind of expected to do that. Is this, I think today's youth, I think that contributes to their sense of loss of identity. Because you don't have the elders, we don't have the elders in our community. The community structures have changed as well to pass on kind of folk wisdom, if you will, in terms of how simple to be a human being in a society that is full of suffering. And so we missed that relationship bonding where we have the elders to look up to help us have a sense of understanding of ourselves. What do you think?
No, I've thought about that a great deal. And the way I have thought about it and talked about it has to do with people today have far more distractions today than they did when I was growing up, and I'm sure when you were growing up. My father was military, but my father talked a lot about family, his parents, and knowing those kinds of things. And my dad was one of these person who watched movies. But when you watched the movie with my dad, you didn't just watch the movie and get popcorn. When you watched the movie with my dad, you also talked about the theme in the movie and what it says and all of that. That's the piece that I sense is really missing. You got more distractions. But for instance, on PBS, they've been running all this month specials on Black history and those kinds of things. And I sent an email out to my family members saying, this is one of those times when you need to be sitting with your children in front of the set and talking with them about what's being shown. That is missing in the current generation. So you can have young people who are extremely intellectually bright, but have very little appreciation for their history in their families and history at large, really. And they generally are not attached to older people, like grandparents. Bernard, you may know this about me, but again, talking about a person who was raised in a different time frame. When my grandchildren were born, I went and spent a week with the new family structure, and Mary went and spent a week with the new family structure. And we did that with every one of them because we wanted them to know we did that for every one of you. When they hit 5, they came and they spent a month with us in the summer. We were having them all at one time. That's when I first bought my minivan. But we learned quickly not to stay home we learn quickly, get them in the minivan and go somewhere, plan it and go somewhere and take pictures. So you had that sense of common village. You go back to that kind of language. That is what's missing with our current generation. So they don't have an appreciation of an aging person that can enjoy being with them and talking about things that they experience. That is missing big time.
Mhm. When you mentioned the minivan, my parents had a motorhome, and in the summertime they would pack the motorhome with with their 5 kids and our friends and relatives. So all of us were in this motorhome, just having fun and laughing and fussing with each other, but just together. That was some of the best moments, just as family getting together. And I was also thinking, I used to have this was years ago, I was able to access. We should look for that. It was an African music channel. And the thing that I liked about it is that in the bands, the groups that were playing, you had all ages, including people like 80 years old on the guitar.
Yeah.
You're like, wow. There was no distinction. I mean, they included the elders in there, and I'm sure they still do. Although a lot of places in Africa, they're being influenced by Western norms. So you may see less and less of that. But I was always struck by the fact that the elders were part of their music groups. And they weren't pushed to the side. So there's kind of a...
Yeah, right. You will not push aside. I think it's interesting, and I have not, I cannot document this per se. This is more of a personal impression. So much of our psychology in the Western world is around individualization, being individuals. And I think that's often confused because I think the most people would see that as being an individual, doing my own thing. But I think what they have not recognized is that you can be who you are and still connected to community in a meaningful way. It doesn't mean separating, but it means you can still be connected in community. And so many of the young people today that I deal with tend to think they have to pull away. They have to be unique and different than everybody else. And as a consequence of that, they do not connect very well with older people. They see them as out of step rather than people who have a wisdom bank that they can actually draw on.
Right.
I see that missing a lot.
How do you think we can do a reversal of this trend? How do we get people to start really looking at their elders and honoring them and pulling them back into activities and things that they're doing?
Well, here again, allow me to go personal. One of the things I've done, I have made myself available to speak at family reunions.
Oh, nice.
Where that's what I talk about. I talk about what family really is about. And it's not always about being off by yourself somewhere, but how do you connect to one another and then draw on the strength of one another, including the elderly? How can you get history that you would not get otherwise? Right. One of the things I learned personally, because in my family now, I'm in that generation where I'm the oldest. And one of the things I regret, and I have included that in my presentation, is I wish I had talked more with the generation ahead of me about what they experience, the people they know. I really regret that I did not do more of that with them. And I'm trying to encourage that through being a speaker at family reunions, and I am encouraging that in my own family as well. I have a very good relationship with my grandchildren. In fact, my youngest grandchild is in college, and every Thursday night, he make a list of questions he want to ask me, and I make a list of questions I ask him. That kind of notion. And that's what it's really about. It's not about math. I figure the schools would take care of that piece.
Right.
But it's really about talking about knowing the family members that he will never know because they're gone, but he hear me talking about them, so we talk about it, kind of notion. I think that's extremely important to do as one way reverse. I think the other way is what I mentioned earlier. When there is a show or movie on the tube or the big screen
Mhm.
that you think can speak to you and your personal experience, what about inviting that young person to go with you to watch that and then go somewhere and have a cup of coffee or something afterwards and talk about it?
Mm.
Uh,
So
to
very
me, that's where the bonding takes place. It's
Right.
in the talking about it.
important. Mhm.
So, given that the shift has and continues to occur, and we're moving more to the institution of care, um, what strategies will persons who are considering having to place their family members in a caring facility, what would you suggest they do uh, to maintain some emotional, spiritual connection with the elderly parent or that they're having to make this decision about?
I want to go back to something Imani said earlier that I think really address some of that. Um, One of the things I'm encouraging at Wesley Woods is that if you're going to be the primary caretaker,
Mhm.
then set up a schedule where you visit that relative at approximately the same time each week.
Mm.
The reason for that is they're in an environment that is the same every day. There's a schedule, and the environment is the same every day. It's very little. And the type of things they do, they're actually going to be sitting more often than not inside. They won't be able to go outside a whole lot. So, what do you want to do? You want to establish at least one place in a week or 2 weeks, whatever the schedule will allow, where they can look forward to you coming and being with them.
Mhm.
There is stability and security in that kind of approach because they start looking forward to, they come on Wednesday. I know they're going to be here on Wednesday. And they look forward to that coming. That's extremely important.
Mhm.
The other thing I strongly recommend is that be honest with the person about what's happening to whatever possessions they have. We have people who come, they're in the facility, and the family will sell their home to have money to help pay offset some of the costs, but they don't tell the patient. And so the patient is constantly saying to me, I want to go home. Can I
Mhm.
just go visit one day? And I
Mm.
can't tell them the home has been sold, it's no longer there. Those are the kinds of things that I would strongly recommend. If you have a relative, a mom, a dad in a facility, to set up something that is predictable and they can look forward to that. Now, that was hard during the pandemic. As you know, during the
Mhm.
pandemic, sometimes they couldn't even visit them.
Right.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and we still seeing the fallout from that
Mm.
kind of thing. But that's one of the things I would strongly recommend that if you're going to place a grandma, mom, dad, whomever in a facility like that, um, you want it so it's predictable when you're going to show up. Now there's some other legal things that I think has to happen in order to make that also work, and they can cut down on, you know, if 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 I was going to place a relative in a place like this, I would ask myself, what documents would I need to have in place when they are put there?
Mhm.
I would want to know that. What legal documents or signatures should I have available? Like,
Right.
um, you know, who's going to make medical decisions? Who's going to make financial decisions for me? What healthcare information should they have available to them? When you go to a nursing home or place in a nursing home, they do not automatically get your medical record. They get pieces of it, but they don't
Mm.
automatically get your full medical record. What are the
Mm.
most significant problems you think you would encounter. You need to have a plan, a way of thinking about how you're going to encounter those problems. And you want to know what outside resources are available to you to work with, because there's a number of outside resources. And one of the things I always tell families when they come to the Wesley Woods campus, if you have a complaint against the facility in terms of how your loved one is being handled, you need to know how to get into the ombudsman's call. You need to be able to call outside to get some advice as to how best to handle those problems, because generally there will be problems.
Yeah, this is a little off topic, but still on topic. This conversation made me think back to my first, wasn't really a job, but it was like volunteer work. I was a candy striper in the neurology hospital. And myself and my friends who did that, we used to visit with the elderly that were in the hospital. And I was just thinking, as the community response, a lot of the schools have so many work study hours that the students have to complete. Even I think in high schools, I know in the colleges, they all have, different requirements for working in the community. But I think that would be such a nice thing to be able to, not necessarily as a candy striper, but to go and volunteer and visit with people who are in nursing homes or, facilities where the elderly are there. So it's an extension of the family. It's not just the family, but other people come by and hold your hand and ask how you're doing. And, so whoever's listening, if you've got young people who need to have work study hours completed, that may be an option for them.
Yeah. And that's also a place where the church can be helpful.
Absolutely.
Because these facilities welcome groups from churches. They welcome that, those kind of visits. And they don't have to have any particular skill other than just being willing to talk to people.
When I was down at the View, that I would refer to it, not the one on television, I noticed, and I came up with 3 categories. There were those residents who received, to go to a point you made earlier, regular visits by family members. And they were the ones who were lively, energetic. They were bright in terms of their outlook on life and had just a positive energy with them. There was the second group were those who had visitors occasionally, and they had slightly more depressive state, lonely, no one really to share and tell their stories with or to. The staff was, busy, caring for them from kind of the medical aspect. But they were glad to see family members when they did show up. And then there was a group who had no one to come and visit.
Right.
And they really struggled, and they were oftentimes deeply hurt, sad, bitter, and sometimes angry that they had no one to care for them or come and to meet with them. So, the visitation, if even in today's world that we're living, we can have few people who be inspired and touched to go to some of the facilities to visit. Churches, as you indicated, become involved. Those who are at home listening and caring for family members in their home. I have a few clients who are doing that as well. They're able to do that. They need our support and encouragement as they are, moving about this very delicate and important area in family lives.
Well, there are just 2 things I want to say right quick, and because I know we're running out of time. One is working with senior adults. Reminiscing is extremely important. It's the way they stay in touch with meaning. And often people will back away from it because they've heard the story 10 times. One of the things I would encourage people to do is rather than back away from it, don't ask the same questions. You ask different questions about the reminiscing, and that changes the courses of things. Okay. The second thing I'd like to just mention quickly, there are myths about aging. And one of the myths is that as people get older, their needs change. Their basic core needs do not change. They still need to be touched. They still need to be hugged. They still need to be told they are okay. It's a human need that doesn't go away with age. And I share this quick notion. When people sometimes come to Wesley Woods, especially at the towers where they are still very active, mom has been there, dad died several years ago, and they come to visit mom, and mom is holding the hand of another elderly man. And they get all upset. And what I try to help people do, be glad because mom is still alive.
Right.
My point, and I'll back away. My point is the drive to be close to another human being doesn't go away with age at all.
That's a good closing remark. A good place to leave it for now, because we are out of time. Unfortunately, it always feels like we're just warming up and our time is up. But that just means we have to have you back at some point. Whenever your schedule is available, you let us know, and we will fit you in. This has been a wonderful, wonderful discussion, and I'm sure it's touched a lot of lives, because I know a lot of people in their 50s, 60s, 70s taking care of elderly folks, and we so appreciate what you're doing in your center and your wisdom that you shared with us this evening. Yes. So with that, we're gonna again thank you, and we're gonna thank you, our watching and listening audience, for being there with us. I think we're getting lots of this is good topic, Bernard and Imani. I think it's a good topic too.
Thank you very much.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Yeah, we appreciate it. And Gene, don't go away. As soon as we come out there, we will talk to you backstage. Okay. And we look forward to each of you joining us again next week. We have a very interesting show, because we want you to hear about the center that Money and I are about to launch. We've been envisioning this for quite some time, and the door is opening up to help us continue on our mission together, fulfilling our destiny. It is indeed for the ancestors. We hit the ting shawls once, and we will sign off. Thank you, Gene.
All right.